Hello, I'm Corey Rutterkopf, Director of Policy with the Burnaby Board of Trade, and I'm joined here with today with Scott Van Denham, who's running the by-election to join Burnaby City Council. Hi, Scott.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for being here. As the Chamber of Commerce, we're inviting all the candidates to do these short videos to have a chance for voters out there to understand a little bit more about their choice of the by-election coming up on June 26th. And for us, it's in our DNA to be speaking out and advocating for the interests and the concerns of the business community. So obviously a local election is very important. So we're pleased to have the candidates all engaging with us and Scott here today for this video. So Scott, did you want to kick us off and get started here? Do you want to take a few moments and share a bit about yourself and your background and experience and why you're running for council this time?
Okay. I am probably 3/4 of my life long resident of Burnaby. Have lived in the city for 43 years of my life, 32 of those in the Edmonds area. Lived for a while in Richmond before that. I am a university educated person, but I work in, like a lot of people who have such degrees, don't work in the field we chose. But and I'm a renter, lifelong renter, a transit user. So I have a lot of connections to those issues, and I work in the service sector. That's my part of my life work right now. And I guess I could say that for me, the issues that are important to me, that reflect most on my life and people I want to connect with, are issues related to affordable housing and our environment and how we're going to decarbonize our society in the years to come. And so we're approaching what was really kind of the surprise issue of the last election, though it really wasn't a surprise issue, which was the housing issue. And I'm glad to see that council has to date made some efforts to try to address the housing affordability issue. But we're missing a perspective on council. People on council who are there now, as far as I could tell, are all basically homeowners, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's an overrepresentation of the community. A third of the residents of Burnaby are renters. And it's important to have that representation on council to bring that perspective. And that's what I want to do as a future member of council if I'm fortunate enough to be one of the two elected on the 26th.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And to get a bit of a sense of your thoughts in some of those specific areas that tend to be priorities for our members in the business community, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. And maybe I'll dive in on housing, because you led off with housing and affordable housing. And obviously that's an issue that impacts businesses, not just for availability of customers and people to come to the doors, but the workforce, making sure that there's housing for people who are working for Burnaby employers, and we want to be able to have them living within a reasonable distance. So one of the things that we're interested in or have talked about is that missing middle. And I think that term can mean two things. One, for programming or services. So there's, for people who are maybe the workforce housing, people who are fully employed, but maybe can't afford home ownership. What can we do to support them who may be not qualifying for some of the supports that exist currently, but are not able to afford home ownership on their own. So that middle, and then also the middle housing type. We seem to have the single family homes in the neighborhoods, and we have a lot of development with condo development in the town center, but we don't have a lot of kind of row homes, townhomes, things that are maybe a bit larger for a family size but might be a bit more affordable. Do you have any thoughts on, when we talk about affordability, about tackling the affordability for our workforce, the working people of Burnaby, and that kind of missing middle, as we call it?
Yeah, and it's great that you bring up the concept of missing middle, because it was one of the things I did want to focus on in the campaign. And yeah, places like the city of North Vancouver have kind of a concept where they want to have a transition between Lonsdale and the outer parts of their city, where it starts from high rises, working their way up down to single family homes by the time you get to the eastern part of the east and west parts of their city. And in Burnaby, we don't seem to have that. You're right. You kind of go from, I know there's a Savannah and Gilmore, you go from like a high-rise tower to single-family houses, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But around SkyTrain stations, high corridor, high traffic transit routes like the R5 Rapid Bus and other high traffic transit routes, there really should be a more of an emphasis on that 3 to 7 story, 3 to 10 story type building that allows more people to live in kind of a medium density type housing. But that could also be reflected in a smaller sense in existing neighborhoods, where if somebody wants to subdivide the house into like a duplex or a fourplex, but has trouble getting that for city zoning. Allowing a bit more flexibility would help to improve that. Part of the issue I know for the cost of that kind of housing is things like the city has certain minimum parking standards, minimum number of parking spaces per unit. In a time where we're trying to decarbonize, that's probably not a good idea anymore to follow that kind of idea. What we should maybe consider is allow developers to market to specific groups of people who've never owned cars, people who don't want to own cars, and who nonetheless use transit to get around, and then focus on having less parking spaces available. So to give them the flexibility to reduce or even eliminate underground parking garages, for instance, which costs extra money, take extra time to develop, as a way of saving money on the project, and thereby saving money on the unit, whether it's the purchased unit or a rented unit, something like that. As an example, one example of improving the availability, affordability, and availability of multiple family housing.
Yeah, and you're picking up, because you mentioned that the duplexes and adding a little bit of extra density in with those things. Do you have any thoughts on laneway homes, carriage homes, and using that again as adding gentle density to existing neighborhoods?
Indeed, I'd like to see more of that kind of thing happen here too. A really interesting concept would be if, and I've kind of thought about it a couple of times, would be if we created a zone that said, what if you actually wanted to have a developer come along and actually take an existing set of houses, and like basically the idea of developing the lots along a certain block to have every house along the block to have a laneway house as in the back instead of a garage, where those situations exist. And build basically like a mini neighborhood along a laneway that might be widened slightly to accommodate the slightly higher traffic, but you would also have these laneway houses forming an informal street situation with the proper street lighting, that kind of thing, too.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just as one idea, but also where they do exist, or the people want to have them, to make it a little bit easier to apply to have that kind of thing happen with laneway houses.
Okay, perfect. I want to pivot a little bit, because when we talk about affordability and livability, I mean, transportation fits into that a lot, and obviously for transportation and traffic, that's a big issue for our community of businesses and employers. We have the city's currently undergoing a review of its transportation plan. That'll be something that you'll be voting on, the final version of it, if you were to be on council. We have 22 recommendations we've submitted to that, which include everything from more north-south connections, to improving rider amenities along transit routes, to protecting business district parking. So like in the Heights, where maybe you drive once to the Heights and then you're able to walk from there to do all your shopping, and so you've got only one trip in that sense. Those are all recommendations. In your eyes, what do you think needs to happen for transportation in Burnaby, and knowing that we kind of have to serve both transportation within our city and recognizing that as the heart of the region, we have that through traffic that we have to handle as well? What would your priorities or principles be around transportation?
You mentioned the off-street parking situation on Hastings Street, and I think that's something we could carry on to a place like Kingsway. Kingsway has a lot of developments coming up in the near future. It would be interesting to have, I think it'd be a really great idea to have a more walkable, a more healing scale Kingsway that's not just, not just high rises, but you have the mid-rise type structures, but also where those buildings exist, you could have a better transportation corridor for transit, like bus lanes that we do on Kingsway, but at the same time, putting off to the sides of those sides of Kingsway at certain blocks, every few blocks, having having parking spaces in those areas. So you have a little bit of off-street parking like we do on the case of the Hastings Street situation. North-south is a lot more of a challenge because we don't have a lot of direct routes. One solution I know is coming up is the Hold'em overpass. That's a project coming up the port's supporting because it helps them get their trains to the city more easily, and gets rail traffic to the port more easily. But more importantly, from the city perspective, it allows us to have a better connection between North and South Burnaby. It's still on the city's west side, bit of a challenge there. And because we have a lake in the middle of Burnaby, going around that's going to be, going over that's obviously not an issue. So we have to kind of think about how we can get, if not better vehicle traffic, like private vehicle traffic, maybe improve the transit usage along that Hold'em corridor. Just because right now we have not quite a rapid bus service, but there is a more frequent bus service on Willingdon that we have now. That's good. we can maybe try that in the Holden corridor. And, that could also extend into the Kensington overpass corridor, creating a bus service that connects it better from like the Heights, Capitol Hill area into South Burnaby. Something to push TransLink on that way.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. The on transportation, one of the more higher profile files that will be on potentially on your desk on council would be the Burnaby Mountain Gondola project. Have you had any thoughts on your position on that?
Generally in favor of the idea. Route is probably going to be the biggest issue as far as that's concerned. Where exactly it ends up going, and you have to kind of balance the how efficiently it gets people from one end from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain against running over people's houses. And I know one of the original routes they planned for would have taken it over, I think, almost over the edge of a housing co-op. I think it's still one of the route options. So we're going to have some challenges with addressing that. But in a general concept, I support the idea on one argument alone that about half the bus service that serves Burnaby Mountain right now uses the southern approach. So that's the 145 and 143 bus routes. Those buses taken off Burnaby Mountain could then be redeployed somewhere else. And that's a better use of the vehicles, drivers, less wear and tear on the vehicles if they're deployed somewhere else. And maybe that's where that north-south corridor, transportation comes up in terms of improving transit service. It won't help the west side of the mountain very much. And the people who live there have to commute westward because it's not really going in that direction. But it would at least help on the southern approach. Yes. And so I would support that as an idea. In a general sense, like I said, we have to worry about the cost of it. We have to worry about exactly what route it's going to take in the end, and how much time it's going to end up ultimately saving. Also, maintenance costs, because if you do a more elaborate route, then you have to worry about maintenance costs of having a system that turns instead of going straight up the mountain, kind of thing. So.
Okay, thanks for that. The one of the topics that wouldn't be surprising to be top of mind for a business group is taxes, and property taxes obviously is the main taxation at the city level. Where's your philosophy on this, or your general thoughts around the importance of maintaining? Is it important to maintain competitiveness on commercial taxes, business taxes between Burnaby and other parts of the region? And how would you balance the competing interests on residents who are voters and tax and businesses who are taxpayers and job creators and maybe not voters, but making sure that we have an appropriate balance between the ratio of what we expect from the residential tax base and what we expect from the commercial tax base?
In terms of balance, yeah, you're going to need to keep the balance. And it's hard to be ultimately nice to distinguish between businesses that are entirely owned and operated by people who live in Burnaby and those that don't. That'd be really hard to do, possibly. In other words, to give an incentive towards those who actually have a home-based business in Burnaby. And that would be one thing that could potentially help. As it stands, though, I think Burnaby's position in terms of both property taxes and residential taxes, we fall somewhere around the average in the region. And I think on the residential side, possibly a bit below the average for property tax levels. And it's important because of the overall cost of living here, to maintain that as close as possible to being in that average, moderately competitive price range. Like I said, business-wise, again, you want to try to do that, keeping in mind that fewer of the business owners live within Burnaby. I kind of want to favor it towards those who operate maybe home-based businesses, where you might want to add a bit of a leaning towards those who do that. That'll be kind of my approach, really.
Okay. The one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, and we're galloping towards the end here of our time, so I'll maybe end with this one. Is,
sure.
What are your thoughts on what the city can do, should be doing to help combat and mitigate the impact of climate change? Obviously, there's roles for every level of government. What do you think the city is doing right now? What might you want to see the city do if you were on council and had a vote on the climate file?
As far as what the city can do in terms of its assets, one thing is to move towards non-fossil fuel-based use in buildings and vehicles, fleet, and use renewable energy to regenerate the city's power where possible. So using things like heat pumps instead of gas-based burners would be a starting point. So that would be involving either a new building or a retrofit where it's cost effective to do a retrofit. Not in all cases it will be. Some older buildings really should just be replaced outright. It's cheaper to do it that way. But as we move towards renewing city infrastructure, we should be cognizant of the idea of not using fossil fuels for those types of purposes, for building, heating, and air conditioning, that kind of stuff. Fleets, again, update the fleets, go to electric. I just saw on a website recently that a city in Wisconsin has bought the first electric fire truck in North America. And, you know, fleet changes, those are things that are going to be coming down the pipe. That's still, you know, probably still a few years away before that becomes more readily available and more cost effective, but that's the kind of thing we need to pay attention to. Now, then comes the big elephant in the room we're not talking about, Trans Mountain. Yes, opposing that project, the expansion project, is a good idea, but even if we stop the project, there's still a 68-year-old tank farm sitting on Burnaby Mountain that one day could suffer a catastrophic accident of some kind. And there's 4 or 5 other petrochemical storage and production facilities in Burnaby, all of which could suffer such an accident. And they all are not helping, they're in fact contributing to our carbon footprint. I'd like to start the process of us nudging these places out of the city. One approach there could be through the official community plan by creating a different zoning designation for these sites from industrial towards a transition zoning that basically says to these organizations, petrochemical companies, that we like to see sites turn into something else in the future. This is going to take some time. It's going to take 10, 15, 20 years, but if we're saving 10, 15, 20 years off the back end of this process and getting them to shut down before we have either some kind of a disaster or, you know, produce too much carbon into our atmosphere that causes, you know, all the problems we're worried about, the better off we are. And if we get these sites redeveloped over time, once they're reclaimed, once we deal with the contamination of these sites, we then also get our waterfront back, and we get a lot of land that's then can be used for other purposes. There's enough land there to equal downtown Vancouver and more between all these different sites. Then you have to then think about how we can make these sites different in the future. They're all going to go at some point. It's just a case of speeding up the process. And that's something I'd like to start.
Okay, thanks for your comments here today, Scott. We're trying to make these videos short and consumable. So if you're watching this, make sure you tune into the other videos. We've invited all the candidates to come and share their thoughts and perspectives with you, so you have the information that you need ahead of the by-election on the 26th. But Scott, thank you for taking the time to join us for this one today and to share a little bit more about you and why you're running.
Thanks for hosting us, Corey.
Take care.